All right. Hey guys, welcome to our first ever live stream. We are excited to be here. We are a Strong Starts podcast. And if we have any tech issues, just because it is our first time, please just let us know in the chat. And today we're going to be talking about kids struggling in school, or more specifically, we're going to be speaking today to parents and caregivers about what to do when you find out that your child is struggling. And if this is your first time with us, welcome. My name is Sarah, and this is my co-host, Jessica.
Hi, everyone. Thanks for joining us.
And we are the Strong Starts podcast. We're a social worker and a BCBA, and we work in schools. And Jessica, it seems like you and I usually find ourselves in a meeting with a parent right after they found out that their child is struggling or has something that they're struggling with. So we've had this conversation a lot over the years. And I think that probably we've garnered some tips maybe, or some different ideas that we found ourselves repeating over and over in these kinds of meetings. And so we're going to share that with folks today. Share out some tips and some ideas. And just as a bit of a disclaimer, because we will be talking today about IEPs and special education, but we are not lawyers. We are not legal experts, trained special education advocates, none of that. We care about kids, and we have had to learn a lot about special education in our jobs, but we won't be giving out any of that kind of advice today. That being said, if you are looking for that kind of advice, definitely still, we're happy, reach out. We're happy to kind of direct you where to go, but we are not the legal experts in the room.
No, absolutely not.
I felt like I just had to say that.
Yeah. And what Sarah said is true. We sit in these meetings and oftentimes we hear parents say things like, oh, I didn't know what to do. Oh, yes, we did see a pediatrician. Or, oh, no, I didn't know I could take this to a pediatrician. And we're just not sure what the next steps are or what we should have done in the past. So that's where this stems from.
Yeah, 100%. And just remember throughout this whole conversation today, you are your child. You're the expert on your child. You know your child best. So trust your gut, trust your instincts. I know sometimes what I've heard from some folks is they come into meetings with people like us, Jessica, who have like a bunch of different letters after their names and papers on the walls and things. And it can seem like you and I are the experts and we should have all the answers and what we say goes. But the truth is, no, you as the caregiver or parent, you are the one who knows your child best. So trust your instincts. If you can see that they are struggling, then it's definitely time to partner with the school to find a solution.
Yeah, because you will be told sometimes that, these behaviors or challenges, academic challenges, they might be brought to you as, oh my gosh, these happen at school. So that's one thing we hear a lot of. And we also hear parents say, really? Because this doesn't happen at home. We also hear the opposite. This happens at home, so we're bringing you a concern. And the school might say, oh, well, we don't see that at school. And then the other scenarios, wow, we see this everywhere. It happens at school, it happens at home, it happens when we go out in public. So some of the challenges you might be seeing or you might be talking to the school about, or a pediatrician, outside provider, are academic challenges, often in the case of like task completion, maybe needing extra time. There's low frustration tolerance. We might even see some social emotional challenges. There's some anxiety, maybe some trouble making friends or keeping friendships. And sometimes kids just have these really big feelings, and they communicate those big feelings in inappropriate ways. We also see trouble with focus, trouble with, there's a refusal to follow directions, and maybe it's not non-compliance, but it stems from that frustration. Even physical symptoms, and that's actually more common than people realize. There's, sometimes stomach aches, headaches, maybe they have to take naps, or they're super wired, or they have an appetite all the time and they're constantly relying on snacks, and it's part of the regulation tool.
Totally. And there are a lot of different reasons that you might see something at home, but not at school but not at home, and wherever. And so that's actually a really good indication. I think that it's time to bring some folks together because we might be able to figure out what's going on. There's just a ton of, we could probably do a whole episode just on that, Jessica, like make note of that. We should probably do something specifically on that. But anyway, We won't be diving, maybe we'll touch on that a little bit. I don't think we're going to be diving too much into that today, but definitely when you realize that your child needs help or needs some support, or you're even just wondering if they do, the next logical question is usually, okay, who do I even talk to at the school? There's so many different people, and schools can feel like this big, like unwieldy bureaucracy. And sometimes it's even hard just to find folks' phone numbers. I know I've received that feedback from parents sometimes of like, I wanted to talk to the school counselor or school psychologist, but their number isn't listed or their email's not listed. So believe it or not, there is usually a dedicated team of professionals who is ready to support you. And your first line of communication should almost always be to your child's classroom teacher, because they see the academics, they see the behaviors, they see it every single day. And they usually have a lot of tools and different supports and strategies and things that they can put into place right away. Or on the other hand, they might have some things that they're doing. And if you're seeing if your kid's struggling at home, your kid's teacher might be like, hey, I have some things that I'm trying. They might help. They might work. Why don't you try them out at home? But beyond the teacher, you can also reach out to your school counselor. If you have any questions about social emotional challenges, behavior challenges, you could for sure reach out to your school's nurse or your district's nurse. If you suspect that there might be some physical health things going on, if you're hearing about symptoms, or if you already know, maybe you just went to the pediatrician and you just found out, hey, my kid has this new diagnosis. I'm not really sure what to, I got some information from the pediatrician. Don't really know how it relates to school. Reach out to your school nurse or your district's nurse. If you think that there might be something about it that's impacting their learning. Or you could reach out to your school or your district will likely have some kind of school psychologist who specializes in behavior and child development, who might be able to provide some insights as well. But you definitely don't have to figure this out alone. I think that that's always the biggest concern too, is like, again, like you hear, and maybe that's part of the problem of how I started this out by saying you're the expert on your child. There can be a lot of pressure too on the flip side, like I should have all the answers. You don't have to have all the answers. Like, trust your gut, but also there are people there to help.
Yeah, and one thing that I also thought of while you were talking and reflecting on a message or I mentioned earlier is that what other thing that might happen in all of this is your child might already be receiving services in an
Mm.
area. So say they receive services in, I don't know, reading. And then all of a sudden you're starting to see problems in math, maybe behavior, maybe even communication, speech. And so sometimes it's a little confusing when they're already on an IEP or they're already receiving support for one area, but then all of a sudden another area starts popping up as an area of concern. And so when that happens, I usually encourage anybody who is part of that child services to call an IEP meeting, because what that
Mm-hmm.
means is there's a concern, there are services, and some sort of needs not being met with the current services. And that might mean we go through interventions again for that area. That might mean an additional team meeting. But it is important too, if you notice that there's an additional concern beyond what they're serviced for, that you also bring that to their attention. And that usually goes through either the teacher or the case manager. So if they already have a case manager for an IEP, that's something you could talk to them about as well.
No, that's a really good point. And so once you've started that conversation, you talked about services they might already be in, and even, some of those supports that come outside of an IEP. Most states have something, Jessica, called that it's some kind of leveled system for intervention. I think last time I checked, it was like over 40 states in the US have some legal requirement to have some kind of leveled intervention system in their schools. You might hear terms like MTSS or RTI or some other term. That's another barrier, right? Is all these acronyms we have flying around all the time. And parents are like, what are you even talking about? So likely your school has some kind of tiered support system. And basically what this is it's the way that the school organizes all of their different types of academic and behavior and social emotional instruction. And we'll use an analogy of a swimming pool. So, and like swimming lessons. So you can think of tier 1 as like the whole pool. This is the general education classroom. It's where every student in the pool is learning, getting the same basic swimming lesson from the same instructor. But most kids do great here, but at the same time, like, what if a child starts to sink, isn't picking up on the skills that they're learning? You don't want them to drown in the pool. So that brings us to tier 2, or like the shallow end and the kickboard group. They're practicing their skills on a kickboard. And if a few kids are struggling to keep their heads afloat here or to get their footing, the teacher isn't just going to kick them out of the pool. They're going to instead give them that kickboard. And in schools, this might look like a small reading group or a small social skills group. Or maybe even we're looking more at like accommodations, which we'll dig into a little bit later, until they're able to catch up, and then they can go back to the main instruction, or they're getting it at the same time, whatever. But anyway, then if a child is in that kickboard group and then they still need even more intensive help, we move on to tier 3. And that's like having a one-on-one swimming coach or some really specialized teaching in swimming lessons. But in schools, this might look like additional mentoring, tutoring, brief school counseling. It can look like a lot of different things. But the whole point is, likely your school has something like this, Jessica. And I think sometimes these things are not to anybody's fault, but these things are sometimes hidden. Or maybe they're mentioned at back to school night, but then never again. And so your child, you might see that your child is struggling and then find out, oh yeah, well, we could put them into like a social skills group. We didn't even realize that this is something that they were struggling with. Maybe they've never talked to the teacher about how they're struggling to make friends, but they mentioned to you at home, we have social skills groups. Let's put them in a social skills group. So opening up the conversation about what supports already exist is a great place to start.
Yeah. And as a parent, it's a good question to have. Like, hey, I see my kid struggling at home. What's going on at school? What are some steps? Because yes, the teacher should be bringing all these concerns to the table, but teachers don't call parents every single day to update parents on every single kid. And, I was a teacher, and I get it's hard to keep up sometimes, and like I said, sometimes it could be happening at home and not at school, or vice versa.
Mm-hmm.
So it's always okay to ask the question and start the process. And once that concern is brought to the table, like you said, there's an intervention process that takes place. And usually there's data, progress monitoring. Hey, I want to see if this is working. What numbers can you give me to show that it is or isn't working? What are you seeing? And then a lot of times we discuss the progress being made. Are they making progress? Are they not making progress? Do we need to adjust the intervention, try something new? But eventually, if there's not progress being made and we've tried A, B, C, D, we've gone through X, Y, Z. And so then it might be time to say, hey, does the student need an evaluation for special education? And if that is brought to you, I caution parents, don't be scared of that question. It's not a death sentence just because the question is asked. And I know, being an 80s baby myself, there's some stigma still around special education. And I guarantee you, it is not the same as it was that many years ago. I won't date myself. Although you can calculate yourself.
Do it. Yeah. I was going to say.
So once that is brought to the table, you can consent as a parent, yes or no. I do want my kid evaluated. I don't want my kid evaluated. All that means, if you say yes, is that your student will be evaluated. It doesn't mean anything is decided. It just means that we're going to start some testing. We're going to see what the test results give us. So once you have the consent, there are 60 calendar days to complete that evaluation. Now, there's a little caveat to that, because that's according to the IDEA federal guidelines. States can have different timelines, so it's important to consult with your district, your school psychologist, to see what their timelines are. The district that we work in, it's slightly different than what we're saying as well. So make sure that you're checking that. But once the evaluation is complete, you will sit down with a team of people who evaluated. They'll go over the results with you, and they'll talk to you about fun numbers like standard deviations and discrepancies and the discrepancy model and percentiles. And they'll tell you all these numbers. And that's a whole nother podcast in itself. Um, and then once you do that, the team and parents are an equal part of that team. It's really important to remember that. Parents are an equal part of the IEP team. The team will sit down and they'll determine what areas your child is eligible in, if any. So say they say, you know what, they qualify for behavior and they qualify for speech language. Then the team determines if that is actually going to make it into an IEP. So they're eligible for these areas. Will they benefit from specially designed instruction, which we'll talk about in a little bit too? And if the team says yes, they have 30 calendar days to develop an IEP, then have an IEP meeting to go over what those services could look like. So there's a lot of steps that take place from the time you give consent. And that's another, misconception is we say, yes, we want to have a special education evaluation. And the timeline for that is long. It does not happen overnight. It's a lot of evaluations. The team writes reports. We cannot evaluate a kid in a day. And so while that calendar is going, while the clock is ticking, we also continue to provide interventions and support for the child. But then once we reach that time where we say, yes, the kid is eligible, or no, they are not, we move to what may or may not be the IEP and then begin services. So it is important when you start talking to them, your school district, your teachers, case managers, that you ask about the timeline and you ask about what's going to happen while that clock is ticking.
Even as you're explaining it, I'm realizing how convoluted it is and how even, school staff, I think this is something that's even confusing for us sometimes, this whole process and what it really means. And I'm glad that you mentioned that interventions continue, because that's another part, even while we're testing, is that's another part I think that gets a little bit muddled sometimes, is the fact that we're still providing interventions and supports. It's also possible that we were trying out one of those leveled interventions as part of general education and it just wasn't like the right fit for your kid. And that's okay too. Like that's okay to then still advocate for, hey, have you guys tried any other kinds of interventions you could try while we're in that testing process? Because really what it comes down to when we're testing a child for special education is we're asking if there's an educational disability, which is different from medical. And so there's it, and we'll dig into this. I know that you're going to go into this a little bit more too, Jessica, towards the end, but that is a very particular question to be asking. Like I can say about a lot of students, about almost all students, yes, they need some extra support to be able to make the reading standards or math standards or behavior standards or whatever. That doesn't mean that I'm saying about them that they have an educational disability. So knowing, I guess, all the avenues and feeling empowered to ask questions about all the different kinds of ways that kids at school get support, not just special education, becomes really important. And one of the other things that might happen in this process is you might be asked to sign a release of information or a records request form or exchange of information, something like that. We get a lot of questions from parents about these. So basically what these are permission slips for us to be able to share information or for outside providers to be able to share information with us. And this is often like if you just found out that there was something medical going on, that's often us talking to the pediatrician, or maybe your kid sees a therapist. This is us talking to the therapist about some things that we could be doing at school. These are helpful for the evaluation process, or they can be, but it's also another avenue for us to pull in some other perspectives so that we all as a team, you included as the parent or caregiver, can get some different ideas about how to support the student. I hear sometimes, Jessica, like concerns or drawbacks about these, or wondering is like, is that really important because maybe they don't have any kind of medical diagnosis, or is that really important because they're working on something in therapy that they're actually not, it has nothing to do with school. And you're always welcome to not sign these. I just think in my experience, it's never not been useful to collaborate with somebody else who gets to see your child in a different way, or maybe has a different perspective or area of expertise than I do. So that's kind of what I would say about releases, and getting those signed.
Yeah, and it's your right as a parent whether or not you want to share outside information with the school.
Mhm.
I will tell you from being on, because I'm a parent, I work in, I was a teacher, I work in schools now. So being on all sides, it is so helpful for the school if they have that information. Um, and we follow, all of the privacy guidelines,
Mhm.
all the policies that you can list. Um, when we do that. But for us to get a big whole picture of your child, it is only going to benefit your child. We only see what happens at school. And like Sarah said, that's really what the evaluation team is going to look like or look at is the impact that, whatever is going on with your child has at school. So, for example, we have students who have autism and don't have an IEP. They
Mhm.
don't need services at school. They are doing things outside or whatever parents have set up for them or whatever we have set up does not impact their education enough to warrant an IEP. They might have accommodations or a 504. But I've done FBAs before, like functional behavior assessment. And once I get all of that outside provider information, I'm able to do such a more thorough evaluation on the child's behavior. The other benefit to that is if you are trying to get outside services, we know there's a waiting list for everything, it seems like. So if you're trying to get outside services support, even in the home, respite care, whatever, a lot of times the paperwork that we have at school can be very beneficial to those outside providers. So when you send us that information, we are able to send them what they need, also to support you and your child at home. The other benefit, Sarah, is that we can work on the same thing. So if they're
Yes.
that is my favorite. If they're doing outside, I don't know, OT, occupational therapy, and they're working on a de escalation or sensory strategy, and then we're doing something completely different at school, that can be very confusing. And so being able to marry those things together and be more consistent for the child is so beneficial.
Yes, and like not to interrupt you, but interrupt your flow, but going back to like if you are looking for something for some sort of outside provider support, blah 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 blah, long wait list, etc., is like please tell me that that's what you're looking for. I promise you, the school counselor of 2026 is not the school counselor of even 10 years ago. Like we now are all about systems and advocacy. We want to know so that we can help. So we will, if you say to me, hey, I'm trying to get off of a wait list, can I sign this release of information so you can talk to intake and tell them about what's going on at school to try to help? I will do that. Anyway, just a plug there.
Yeah, and if you ever get to work with Sarah and you're fortunate enough to, she is a bulldog. Man, she parents are like, I need this service. Sarah's like, I got it. I will call, I will beg, I will do whatever, and she will figure out how to get the kid what they need. So Sarah's right. School counselors are not the same as they used to be. And so to continue on what we were talking about with services and supports,
Mhm.
there's a few different things that a school can provide. One that Sarah talked about with interventions and support and tiered systems, which when we say tiered systems, we're talking about the frequency and intensity of an intervention increasing over time. And also we also determine sometimes if a student needs specially designed instruction through an IEP, individualized education plan, or supports through a 504. So we're going to talk about the difference between that because I know sometimes with parents that can be a little tricky to navigate. So to go over what an IEP is compared to a 504, an IEP is a federal. It talks about a federal. IDEA comes from federal legislation.
Mm, mhm.
And it determines if a student has a disability, and there's 13 areas that a student can qualify for. There's also a determination if it impacts educational performance. Does the student need specially designed instruction? So we're talking about specialized teaching for that student. It could be individualized, maybe it's with a small group, it could be in a classroom, outside of a classroom, pull out, push in, but something specially designed needs to happen for that child in order to support their success at school. And this can be determined through services, supports, minutes. We have some kids that get 15 minutes of social group a day, to hours, to kids who are hardly seen, to who are in a special education room full time. Either way, it comes with a formal plan with annual and measurable goals. That is very important to know. They will measure and progress monitor to make sure the student is reaching the goals and make a determination on what to do if they are not reaching their goals. It can provide accommodations and modifications, which I'll talk about in a second. And there's a whole team. If your student has an IEP, be prepared because you will have a team to support you. The guardian has to be a part of that team, a general education teacher, a special education teacher, depending on where you're at with the evaluation process, a psychologist, maybe a specialist. And when I say specialist, I'm talking about like speech, OT, PT, and there's a district rep of sorts. So it could be an administrator. And they meet at least once a year. So don't be fooled by that one time a year. They can meet as often as necessary. The one time a year is minimum. And the student is reevaluated one time every 3 years at minimum. So just know that if your student's on an IEP, you can call a meeting at any time. If you don't feel like it's working, something's happening, you need to discuss something, it doesn't have to be one time a year. And IEPs service students anywhere from birth to age 21, and that's through high school. So we do have some students that are in high school through age 21. It does not typically continue into college. Colleges don't service IEPs. But then we can do a 504. So a 504 is part of the Rehabilitation Act, part of ADA. It's for a known or suspected disability. This is something that can be mixed up often. A student doesn't have to have a piece of paper with a diagnosis to get a 504. So if a district says, hey, we need a diagnosis, that is not true. They just have to have a suspected disability that's impacting their education. Typically, it impacts a major life function like school. And in school, the purpose of a 504 is to provide access to general education and remove barriers. It is a formal plan, and there are accommodations and modifications. So we think of accommodations as tools, like tools in your tool belt. They might need something that is not available to other students. So right now we're moving towards more universal access, but what we have seen in the past is like noise canceling headphones. But just so you know, a student doesn't have to have a 504 to get noise canceling headphones. Again, that's a whole nother podcast. But things, maybe certain scheduled breaks, maybe a certain system, whatever they need to help them get through the school day. And I think of like, you know, if every person at a construction site has the same tool belt and they have, you know, the hammer, screwdriver, and they have certain tools. So everyone has that tools, but maybe this person can't hit with the hammer as well as the other guys or other girls or people at the construction site. They might get a special, you know, power hammer. And my husband is going to cringe at this because I don't exactly know what the name of that is. And I should, because we probably have one.
Power hammer is great.
Power hammer. Nail gun. I think that's it. I think it's a nail gun. And on the and so they would have a different accommodation than the other people at the construction site. And on the 504 team, there is the guardian, a general ed teacher, and usually there's an administrator. That can depend. It's not always required, but that can get a little muddy because sometimes we want the administrator there. But whoever the 504 coordinator, like in our district at our school that we work at, Sarah is the 504 coordinator. So she gets all the meetings. And It is reviewed at least one time per year, but it can also be looked at more than that. And a 504 can follow somebody and be adjusted and changed for their entire life.
Mhm.
So adults can have one in their workplace, college students can have a 504. Um, so a 504 can always be present whenever somebody needs one.
Yeah, it's I was explaining to somebody the other day, a parent actually, as so basically because it's the Americans with Disabilities Act, anywhere that's funded by the government, so could be your workplace, definitely could be a public college, for sure is a public school. They have to follow the ADA. You can't discriminate against somebody who, for instance, comes in a wheelchair to a school. So like, for example, and this is the tricky thing about 504s too, Jessica, that I run into a lot is like, in reality, if somebody came to our school, let's say our school was just entirely stairs, and somebody is in our school and it's a student with a wheelchair, like technically, I don't have to wait for a meeting to know that I need to provide access to them immediately so that they can come to school. Like, period. I can't discriminate because it's part of the Americans with Disabilities Act. So, as a parent, if you're finding that your kid is not getting access, that is an issue with not following ADA, just so you know. But again, doesn't have to be medical, on the surface, but a 504 could really be for anything. I mean, like if somebody has, a broken leg and they're going to be in a cast for a very long time, and so they can't get into the school building because of the way the school is set up, the school building has to do something about it, is essentially what it is, in order for them to be able to have their education.
Yeah, and I like how you put that because it doesn't just have to be like behavior or,
Mm-mm.
mental health. It can be, like you said, wheelchair, like they broke their leg, something is happening physically and it's temporary. And so that brings another good point. Neither one, an IEP or for 504, is a life sentence.
No.
That is not. So if your kid has an IEP, they can also get off of the IEP.
Yes.
That's why we monitor progress, meet goals, have reevaluations, because our ultimate goal is to not have to have an IEP for your or 504 for your child. We want to be so good at supporting them that we're building this independence and we're building the capacity and they're getting what they need, that they eventually won't need an IEP. And that's our goal, right? We
Yes.
want to work ourselves out of a job. Um, but we also want to make sure kids have the support they need to access what they need. And so, yeah, and I know that we talked about all these things very briefly, Sarah. I feel like we might have elicited some more questions than we gave answers. And we definitely did not give a thorough explanation on all things IEP, all things 504. So if you're listening and you're an expert on those, just know that this was just the highlight.
Yes, please.
But please reach out to us if you need any additional resources.
Yeah, 100%. And, just remember, like, you are an equal partner in all this. We're going to be talking our next live, Jessica. We're going to actually be talking more about the IEP meetings themselves and how to be your child's best advocate for those, and that they really aren't as scary as they sometimes seem. I swear, I promise. Oh my gosh, I was so intimidated by IEP meetings when I first started in schools. And I'm a little less intimidated now. So some lessons learned there. So we're going to be going to that a little bit more, but we appreciate you all being here with us. And yeah, if you have any questions, for sure, let us know. Follow us on social media. We are at Strong Starts Podcast on Facebook, Instagram, TikTok, and YouTube. DM us with any questions, or follow us on there for more content.
Yeah, and visit our website, strongstartsllc.com/events to get more information. We have like Sarah said, we have more about navigating IEP meetings. Our last one of the summer, we even have a special guest coming on to our podcast live, Ginger Healy. If you don't know her, she's the author of Regulation, Co-Regulation, and she agreed to be on our podcast graciously. And so hopefully you guys are able to tune in, you're able to enjoy it, and get some support you need. And we're promising to keep them fairly decently short. We know it's summer and we got to enjoy the sunshine as well.
100%. So until next time, bye, everybody.
Bye. Did you end stream?
Yes.
Okay, good. hey, that wasn't too bad. I just messed up on